Hello, and thank you for purchasing the memory game from 4-Bit Industries. In this video, we will see how to install all of the components. Let's begin by taking an inventory. So first we have a PCB. We have a tape of 5 resistors, two 2-volt battery holders. You should have 4 LEDs of different values, a ceramic capacitor, and a little foam block with 4 tactile switches, a piezo buzzer, chip socket, chip, and slide switch. So let's begin with the resistors. Resistors are fairly robust. They are non-polarized, so you cannot install them backwards. You can install them either way. I like to clip the leads away from the tape so I don't end up with any gummy glue on the leads, but that's a matter of style. You can just pull them out if you like. And where we're going to put these on the PCB are in the 5 locations marked R1 through R5. There are 4 around here and another one right next to the piezo buzzer. So to prepare the LEDs, you want to bend the leads down on either side. Then we'll locate R1 and stick the 2 leads through the holes. Again, doesn't matter which lead goes through which hole. Once it's down against the board, you can bend the leads out on the other side to hold it in place for soldering. Now, if you have a helping hands tool or a PCB vise, you can hold this in there, but hold it upside down so that the back is showing up, because this is the side that we're going to solder onto. If you don't have anything to hold the piece down, you can just use tape. As long as the surface you're soldering on can take a little bit of heat, you shouldn't have any problems. So now we're going to come in with our soldering iron. We're going to touch the lead and the pad at the same time, and then we're going to flow some solder in there from the opposite side. And now we have a nice little solder joint. I'll go ahead and do that for the other one. And we can take a slightly close-up look at that. Those are fairly good solder joints. One thing you can look for is on the other side, if you see that some solder has flowed up through the hole, that's actually a good thing. It means you've gotten the lead hot enough and the pad hot enough that solder was able to flow through that hole. The holes are plated through, so that makes a very solid joint. Once you've soldered it in, you can cut the leads, cut them above the solder joint, don't cut through the solder joint. Some advise to trim the leads before soldering so that you do not disturb the joint with your cutters. For beginning solderers, I think it's fine to cut them after soldering. So now we're going to go ahead and insert the next 4. To save time, I'm going to insert them all, and then I'm going to solder them one right after another. Went through my tape. Alrighty, I've got all of them in there. I'm just going to go ahead and solder them up. Now we will trim them. All right, I've got the 5 LEDs in there. Next, I'm going to go to my foam block and I'm going to take out the 4 tactile switches. Now these 4 switches go into the positions marked SW2, 3, 4, and 5. And the leads are bent, which should help them stay in when you solder them. If they aren't staying in, there's enough of a lead on the other side. The leads are short, but there's enough of a lead on the other side that you can bend them a little bit and get them to stay in place. Worst comes to worst, you can tape them into place, and that's perfectly okay to do. Just tape them temporarily for soldering, and then you should be fine. Mine are staying in place quite nicely. So let's just tape the board down this way just a little bit so that it doesn't move around on us while we solder. You should find yourself using a little bit more solder than you did for the resistors, but because these leads are so short, it really doesn't take long to get these hot. I have to move my tape a little bit. Alrighty. So with those switches in, there is one more switch, the slide switch. And that goes up here at the very top. You want the switch pointing out so it's easy to slide back and forth. I'll leave it in the off position. If yours holds in fine, great. If it doesn't, just use a piece of tape to hold it onto the board for soldering. And then you're going to want to solder all 3 leads and the 2 feet. I'll zoom in on that just a little bit. So the 3 leads are in the middle. I'll start with them. And here's a trick. I'm going to solder the center lead first. And then if yours is loose in the board, just take a look, make sure it's still in position. If it's not flat against the board, you can reflow that by putting the iron back on it so it turns back into a liquid. Carefully push it back into position and hold it until it cools. It will get hot, so do this carefully, maybe with a piece of pliers if you need to. But just soldering one point and then checking the alignment, checking the positioning in the board is a good trick for a lot of sort of multi solder point devices, multi-leaded devices. Now on these feet on either side, make sure you really get in there with the iron. You can flow a little bit of solder between the iron and the joint just to make sure you have a good thermal connection. And then you're going to have to feed a good bit of solder in there to get the feet of the switch well soldered to the board. But now that switch has got a good mechanical connection as well as a good electrical connection. Alright, what's next? Let's do the chip socket. Now this is the first one where you have to be careful to insert it the right way round. You will notice there is a little notch at one end of the chip socket. And when you look at the white line here where the chip goes, this is called the footprint. And when you look at the footprint, they draw that little notch. So align the two notches, and then you can try to bend those short little leads out to hold it in position for soldering, but I always end up putting a piece of tape over the top. Most people, most beginning solderers like this approach. But now you can just hit those 8 solder points one after another, but start with just one. Just like I said with the switch, if you soldered just one solder point, I'll start with pin number 1, which is has a square pad, then you can check to make sure that's actually flat against the board, that it's in the position you want it to be in. This one looks fine. It hasn't moved at all. That tape's got it down pretty good. And then you can come and hit the opposite corner and the rest of these, and it will not move around on you. You should be able to feel the leg when you push the iron against it. If the leg seems to have disappeared or fallen into the hole, that means the chip socket has moved on you, and you need to get it aligned in there properly. Alrighty. So next we're going to do the little capacitor that goes below the chip socket. I can go ahead and clip that away, or you can just pull it out. This is non-polarized, just like the resistors. The legs come pre-bent, so you can stick it through, just bend those out a little bit, and solder it up just like you did the resistors. All right. So next we'll do the LEDs, and this is one area where we have to be very careful. So LEDs, like all diodes, have a polarity. And looking at the diode body, you can see how they give you a hint where the diode anode and cathode are the fancy terms for it. But you can see the leads with one longer and one shorter. Now there's a second way to tell which way the LED goes, and that's to feel around the little lip at the bottom of the LED. There's a lip here, you can just catch your finger on it there, but if you come around to one side, you'll notice a flat spot on it. And the flat spot on your LED should be the same side, as the short leg on the LED. So when we look at the PCB and we look at the footprint for the LED, we're going to notice two things that help us get the right lead into the right hole. One is that the pads themselves are different shapes. There is a round pad that goes with the long lead, and there is a square pad that goes with the short lead. But then if you look at the footprint, the outline clearly shows that flat spot that's on the rim of the LED. So that's another way to tell which way it goes. But if you haven't trimmed the leads on your LED before inserting them, and there's no reason you should, remember that the long lead should go through the round pad, and then we can just stick that right in there like that. And then again, like you did with the resistors, just bend on the opposite side to keep it in place. Now the placement of the LEDs is not essential. I like to put the orange and yellow ones not next to each other because they do look somewhat similar. And I do like putting the green one on the level 1 position, which is D1 on the circuit board. You can see levels are written next to each of the switches. Now, very, very important that you get these LEDs in the right way around. If you don't, you will be unhappy. Alrighty. Again, look at the board carefully, look for that flat spot, make sure it's on the same side as the flat spot on the footprint, and all 4 flat spots should be pointed in the same direction. So now that I've got those LEDs in, again, I'm not using a PCB holder here, so I'm just going to try and balance it on all 4 so that they're fairly straight in their positions, and then we'll get to soldering. I did kind of bump this LED. I did bump the board as it was solidifying. That's generally not good. It gives you a disturbed solder joint. So I just reflowed that a little bit. Now these 2 pads are fairly close together, and a common problem that beginners will have is accidentally creating a solder bridge. So if you accidentally get the 2 leads hot at the same time, you might get solder connecting one lead to the other, which isn't good. What you can do in that instance is get your soldering iron nice and clean, drag it through the middle of that solder bridge, and it should take a little bit of the solder with it and break the connection between the 2 halves of the LED. Alright, so now we've got the LEDs in there. There's not a whole lot left. So let's take the piezo buzzer. This piezo buzzer is non-polarized, meaning there's no right or wrong way to insert it. Go ahead and put it in position and tape it down. This is one with short leads, and it's definitely a little loose in the place where you put it. Fairly big pads on this one, so it will take a little bit of solder. Now for the 2 biggest pieces, the battery holders. Now the battery holders are a little bit different from the other components because we are going to insert them from the bottom and we're going to solder them at the top. Now these are also polarized because batteries are polarized. You need to look for the springs on the battery holder, and you'll see a little spring looking symbol here on the battery holder outline. Make sure the spring goes to that end. So we're inserting these from the bottom. Spring goes up on this side, spring goes down on the other side. And then when I turn them over, I should be able to just rest these on the holders and they don't go moving around at all. If you find them wiggling around and you want to tape them down, that's fine. Let me just tape this so it doesn't go scooting. And again, these are fairly big pieces of metal, so it might take a bit of heat to get them to solder up. And then we're going to trim these fairly close down. They're thick leads. Again, don't cut through your solder joint, but you'll be less likely to snag a finger on these leads if you trim them down nicely. So now we're done soldering. What's left to do? Well, we do have this last component, the chip, and we need to insert it into that 8-pin socket. But when you look at a chip, you'll see that the legs are flared out slightly. What I like to do to bend the lead straight is roll it against the table, and that'll bend all 4 leads at the same time and keep them all parallel. So I'm going to do that on both sides so that my leads are pointing straight down. And then I'm going to very carefully inspect the chip for either a notch or a dot on top. And in fact, this chip has both. It's got a little notch at the end that matches the notch in the holder and the notch on the footprint. But it also has a tiny little dot in the position of pin number 1. So whether you have the dot, the notch, or both, they're all going to be aligned with the notch at the top end of the socket. So now we're very carefully going to get those 8 pins in there and push straight down on the chip to get it into the socket. Now really inspect this around the edges. Make sure you don't have any leads sticking out, any leads that are bent. That chip's got to go in there straight. Alright, now let me show you how the game works if everything is soldered correctly. First, we'll go ahead and turn the switch on, and it'll immediately start some beeping and flashing. Notice that this one flashes once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. Those are for the 4 levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4. So after it's gone through its flashing and beeping, I'm going to hit level 1. It flashes to confirm the selection, and then it starts showing you a sequence for you to mimic. And that means I won. So level 1 is only 6 long, and it gives you a fairly long time between button presses. So if you're unsure of what the next button is, it's not going to immediately say wrong. Now let's look at level 4. Level 4 is a much longer sequence. Now let's look at what happens if I'm not fast enough. There. Boop, 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 boop. That means I made an error. Hit the wrong button. It tells me immediately. Now, there is a nice feature. If you hold down level 1 while you turn it on, then you get silent mode. So it's just going to flash the LEDs. It's not going to make any sound. So that'll maybe save your sanity. You can hold it like this with your fingers on the battery, so it's good for portable use. And then you should be able to reach all 4 buttons with your thumbs. So that's the memory game. I hope you enjoy it. Bye for now.